Alright, what's up y'all? It's Matt here. What's up? I am back with a discussion video for you guys today. This is a topic that I think is worth discussing now because of what Tetsuya Nomura said in that recent interview. Kind of a controversial topic for Kingdom Hearts fans as well. People are kind of split on it. Let's get into it. So, if you haven't seen already, Nomura did an interview with Game Informer a couple of days ago where he talks about a lot of things like the 20th anniversary, Sora's inclusion in Smash, but he talks a lot about Kingdom Hearts 4 in this interview and what some of his plans are. He doesn't get too specific, but we get some good hints and ideas of what this game could be. And one of the topics that he discussed in this interview was Final Fantasy characters being in Kingdom Hearts in the future. It's been there since the beginning. People have really grown attached to some of these characters over the game, like Cloud and Yuffie and Leon and those kind of people. They've become less relevant in the series over time. Some people were really mad that they did not include Final Fantasy characters in the base Kingdom Hearts 3 game. They eventually came in and Remind. It was just a kind of a small little cameo. But based on what Nomura says in this interview, for those people who are really wanting Final Fantasy characters, I got some bad news for you. Here's what Nomura had to say in this recent interview. I understand that there weren't that many Final Fantasy characters in Kingdom Hearts 3. One thing I want to clear up is that a lot of fans are saying that Kingdom Hearts is this collaboration between Disney characters and Final Fantasy characters. But I really feel like that's not the basic concept of Kingdom Hearts. That's not exactly what Kingdom Hearts is. When we released the first title, we only had a few original Kingdom Hearts characters. When they were interacting with really well-known and beloved Disney characters, I felt nobody really knew these new characters, so it was harder for them to stand their ground just yet. And so we had a lot of Final Fantasy characters involved to lend a hand for everyone to get to know these original Kingdom Hearts characters better. Now there are so many original characters from Kingdom Hearts that are so well loved, and people want to see more of those characters. With Kingdom Hearts 3, since we did have so many original Kingdom Hearts characters, it was hard to find room for including more Final Fantasy characters. We're trying to find a good balance for that. I know that some fans were concerned about that and weren't too happy and wanted to see some more Final Fantasy characters. That's something we definitely need to think about. But just with the sheer number of original Kingdom Hearts characters that we have now, it's hard to say what the exact balance is going to be, and how it will play out in Kingdom Hearts 4. We can't really give a firm reply on this right now. Basically what he's saying there is that there's so many original Kingdom Hearts characters at this point that adding more Final Fantasy characters would be a little bit unnecessary, I guess, and a little bit too much. And he says here that they're trying to find a good balance, but what I think he means by that is that they're probably going to be still less important, and there may even be less of them now. They may take some out, which for y'all who are big fans of Final Fantasy or the Final Fantasy characters in Kingdom Hearts, yeah, that's going to be pretty upsetting news to you. But this response has got me thinking a little bit, and I think it's worthy having a discussion now of, does Kingdom Hearts even need Final Fantasy characters anymore? Do they even need them to be there at all? Like Nomura said in that quote right there, the Final Fantasy characters were included in the original Kingdom Hearts games like 1 and 2 mostly to help get people accustomed to these new Kingdom Hearts characters because there weren't that many of them at the time. They hadn't developed a lot of the story yet, so Final Fantasy characters were there as kind of like training wheels, I guess, to help people get more accustomed to these new characters that were popping up in this series, and, you know, appeal to the already existing Final Fantasy fans that were there and, you know, buying this game because of the people who were working on Final Fantasy already. But now that we're 20 years removed from the original Kingdom Hearts game, it's its own series now, essentially. It has its own rich storyline and characters that people have fallen in love with. It's been so developed and so fleshed out at this point that it's pretty much separate from what it spawned from, Final Fantasy. And, you know, even Tetsuya Nomura said in that quote that, you know, people think of Kingdom Hearts as this marriage of Final Fantasy and Disney, and that's not necessarily the basic concept of it, at least to him. He sees it as its own separate thing, and those Final Fantasy characters were there again as training wheels. But now that it's its own thing, you don't really need them that much anymore. They're pretty much there as fan service at this point, honestly. You know, people were mad that they did not include Final Fantasy characters in Kingdom Hearts 3, so when Remind came out, they added a cutscene with the people in Radiant Garden, like Leon, Yuffie, Aerith, Sid, those people. They didn't even include Cloud or Sephiroth. It was kind of like a 5 or 6 minute cutscene to help explain the data battles and stuff. You could say that's important to the story right there, that was needed, but it did seem like an excuse to put them into the game. And I don't know the production behind it, but it seemed like kind of a rushed job because the voice acting was not the best in that scene. It seems like they read it the day that they got it. And that brings us back to the main topic of this video, and that is, does Kingdom Hearts even need Final Fantasy characters anymore? Do they even need to be there now? And I guess I'll just give my honest opinion here and say, no. No, not really. Now, I think that they should be there in some capacity. I think that they should still be there at least as cameos because, you know, I do have some attachment to these characters. You know, Kingdom Hearts 2 is my favorite game of all time. I grew up with that game. I grew up with those characters. So I do have some attachment to them too. I do think that they should be there in like some capacity. It's, you know, that I do not think that they need to be a main part of the story. I think that they should be side characters and not a main part of the plot. And also, the Kingdom Hearts series is so far removed from its Final Fantasy origins at this point. It's become its own series. It's become its own thing. It is not really associated with Final Fantasy that much anymore, at least in the way that I see it. So I think shoving those Final Fantasy characters in there would just be a little bit too much, at least in terms of the main plot. I think it would be a little bit too overcrowded. You know, Kingdom Hearts 4 is not going to be a game where we're going to be focusing on stuff outside of Sora anyways, so we wouldn't have time to see them that much anyways. We'll see some parts in the other Kingdom Hearts universe. That is part of the things that they want to do. We probably won't have enough time to see them in Kingdom Hearts 4 anyways. He says there wants to be a good balance, but who knows what that good balance may be. Maybe just like one cutscene. Since we're going into a new era of Kingdom Hearts, some things are going to have to change, some things are going to have to go, and I think Final Fantasy characters may be one of those things. I do kind of have attachment to these characters. I would like to see them come back at the very least as cameos, but again, just with this whole new direction that we're going in, there may not be room for them in that space. And you know, I was rewatching the cutscenes with Final Fantasy characters in them from the past games and stuff like that, and I guess just thinking about it a little bit more, they weren't too important to the plot of those games either. I mean, you could make a debate about Kingdom Hearts 2 because they were most important in that game, but even then, they were still there as kind of support characters, and they were not too important in terms of the overall plot. They were there to help the main characters like Sora, Donald, Goofy. You would be missing something if you took them out, but the overall plot probably wouldn't have been affected too much. I think it's just what's going to happen. I think as the series matures, they're just going to be coming in less and less and less, and they're just going to be there as fan service. Essentially, that's what they did with the Remind cutscene, just to quell down the requests from fans and stuff like that. I wouldn't expect them to be making too many appearances in the future. We'll just have to wait and see what they ultimately come up with this new era of the franchise. We don't know too much about it right now, but going forward into the future, things are definitely going to be different, and Final Fantasy characters not being there may be part of it, and it probably won't be missing too much at this point. But I want to hand the discussion off to you. Do you think Final Fantasy characters are needed in Kingdom Hearts? Do you want to see them come back? Or were you mad that they didn't include those characters in Kingdom Hearts 3? How do you think they should bring them back if they do? What's your overall opinion of Final Fantasy characters being in Kingdom Hearts to begin with? Tell me down in the comments below your opinion. Also, make sure to subscribe, like this video, follow me on Twitter, join the Discord server, turn on notifications. Really awesome if you did. This has been Matt, and I will see you guys in the next video, whatever that's going to be. So yeah,